So this is our second Weber on Wednesday WOW event for the month of May, which we celebrate local history, and it's named after Irving Weber, who was a longtime Iowa City resident. He lived to be 98 years old, and he wrote over 600 columns for the Iowa City Press-Citizen, and has really contributed to the local history of Iowa City. And because RAGBRAI is coming to Iowa City this year, we thought that a good intersection with Bike Month would be a program on RAGBRAI and celebrating the history of RAGBRAI. So I am going to turn this over to Larry Fitzpatrick and let him run the show.
We started doing a program here during Bike Month or Bike Week, I think about 4 or 5 years ago. And we've never had a group show up here at the library for any bike event that was much bigger than what we have tonight. But we've always had a good time, and I think we will tonight. It's like this book here has most of the history in it that I know, about early RAGBRAI, and Iowa City's in it. Iowa City's a pretty prominent part in it. It's like Donald Call and John Karras, they started riding bikes together in late 70s, mid 70s, or 60s, and they gradually worked up to longer and longer rides. And one time they rode from Des Moines to Ames, and they said, wow, that was, they were really tired, but they said, that was, quite a ride. So the following year, I think sometime 71 or 72, they decided that they would ride to Iowa City. So they took one day and they left really early, and it took them, they thought, 13 hours to get down here. So once they got here, they knew that people could ride across the state of Iowa just because they rode all the way to Iowa City. So eventually they started RAGBRAI, and there was like one guy from Iowa City that went, and that was Frank, Iowa, and we invited him tonight. But I don't know, something, I don't know, that Frank forgot or whatever, is like, the way I was communicating with him was on Facebook, and he must have deleted his page or whatever. I can't get in touch with him, but it would have been nice to have him. He's been on every single RAGBRAI. But we do have Gordon. His first RAGBRAI was in 1983. He missed the first 10, but he's went on every one since then. Do we have anybody else that's been on, what's your name? Phyllis Black, yeah. 85 and 86. So, really it'd be nice to hear, from some of the people that went a long time ago, what inspired them here in Iowa City to go on RAGBRAI, or what they learned on RAGBRAI, or whatever. It'd all be interesting, because there isn't a whole lot of people left that have went, in those early 70s and 80s RAGBRAIs, especially when RAGBRAI went through Iowa City the very first time. There is. His name originally was Greg Smith, and he changed it to Frank, Iowa, I don't know, 34, how long ago, Gordon?
Many years ago. He used to run the Rogues of the Night.
Yeah, he was the guy that lined up the transportation for Rogues of the Night, and they were like a group from Iowa City that bicycled on RAGBRAI. And I remember my first RAGBRAI was in 92. And I don't know that I met any rogues that year, but the following year, in 93, I did. And they told me, they said, Larry, you can ride your bicycle as far as you ever want to go, as long as you got caffeine, ginseng, and nicotine, they said. And then you won't have any problems, as long as I had those three things. And they taught me, I remember there's people from Iowa City that really actually taught me how to ride a bicycle, and those first times I went, they said, it's important that you keep pedaling as you go downhill, because you burn up the lactic acid in your legs, and always stop on the top of a hill or the bottom of a hill, and don't stop anywhere except for in the shade, they said. So there were some pretty wise people from Iowa City that I happened to run onto. And I don't know, do you guys want to just look at the slides and listen to the music, or do you want to talk? This only lasts for about 10 or 15 minutes, right?
Yep.
I'll place here.
Did they ever do a study on how many people, percentage of people go on RAGBRAI from Iowa?
So, if you want to talk in the audience, let me hand you the microphone.
Did they ever do a study on what percentage of people that are from Iowa are on RAGBRAI? The percentage of Iowans?
I know when I used to go, they always said it was a third to the people from Des Moines, Iowa City, and Cedar Rapids. A third of the people on RAGBRAI. But I don't know if that's still true today or not.
So, one thing looking at these, Todd, these pictures are fairly recent, is that right?
They go back about 10 years. Yeah, these are all from the RAGBRAIs I've been on. I've been on about 8 in the last 12 years, and so these are assorted ones. I've got about 3,000 RAGBRAI pictures, maybe.
So what I think is different, my brother went on the second RAGBRAI, and I'm sure he didn't wear a helmet, and their clothing did not look anything like this clothing. I mean, it's a remarkable change from what people used to wear.
Oh, Terry from Shenandoah? Everybody knows Terry. A few years ago, I was standing with Terry in the starting town, and people kept coming up to him and saying, "Hi, Terry." And I'd say, "Who's that, Terry?" "I don't know." He says, "Everybody knows the guy with one arm, but I don't know them." Those guys are still going. Shirts are getting faded out. I don't know. I have a picture at home of Frank, Iowa, Barry Katz, Dave Culver, and myself. So it was like 120 years of RAGBRAI, and we were talking to two women who were virgins on RAGBRAI, and telling them someday they could be like us. And if you know the four of us, you don't want to be like us.
Can you talk about how the ride works, the whole ritual of the two rivers, and introduce the person sitting between you, Larry?
Oh, yeah, this is
Barb.
Barb Goff. Barb Goff. She's been on a lot of RAGBRAIs too.
How many have you been on, Barb?
RAGBRAI 20 was my first RAGBRAI, and I did every mile and then some for 22 years. And then I've done a couple of years, 2 years after that, and last year I didn't do any. So, a lot of miles of RAGBRAI.
That's a lot of miles. When it started, I kind of wanted to go, and I was in my first year of residency at the university. And I thought, if I go tell Dr. Phlox that I'd like to go ride my bike across Iowa for a week, he'd tell me that he didn't need me as a resident. So I didn't even think about it. And then my cousin's husband started coming from Albany, New York area. And I thought, if this guy can ride across the state, so can I. So I started on 12 when we went through my hometown of Corning, which is, there are really great hills down there. The first death occurred on a hill outside of Corning, on RAGBRAI 12. But it starts on the west of Iowa. You dip your wheel traditionally into the Missouri River. I went out my first day on RAGBRAI on the Saturday to dip my wheel in the river and to the Missouri River where the bridge goes across into Nebraska City, which is a bad road to be riding on, one. And I got out there and I found a little trail going down in. There were a couple of women from Colorado that were there, and they were wanting to dip their wheels. And we got down to the river, and the water was about 3 foot below the bank. So we held our bikes and held them down in the water. And pretty soon we heard this noise. And flying down the trail was a guy on a bicycle who just rode into the water. Popped up with his bike in his hand and said, "Wow, it's a lot deeper than I thought it was." And we pulled the guy out. Otherwise, I don't know what would have happened had we not been there at the same time. But you ride across the state. There's a town about every 10 miles. You pig out in the towns, eat food, take a nap under a tree, talk to the locals, talk to your friends that you meet on the ride. Camp in bigger towns along the way that might be a population of 2,000 to 20,000. Take a lot of cold showers, stand in lines for kaibos, get rained on sometimes, face headwinds sometimes, get sunburned, feel miserable sometimes, and it's hard to have more fun. When I first started, you'd hear the bicycles coming up and they'd be squeaking. They hadn't had any oil on their chain for years potentially. Somebody had taken them out the corner of the garage and they were a 50-pound Schwinn. They didn't have bike shorts on and they were having their rear ends eaten with the seams on their shorts. I saw a guy one time on the third or fourth day of RAGBRAI and he couldn't walk. He said, "My son told me to ride my bike before the RAGBRAI started, so I rode it around the block. I guess I should have ridden it more because the first day I was okay, the second day my knee hurt, the third day it was terrible. Today I can't walk, I'm going home." Now people come prepared. They've ridden their bikes a lot, they have fancy bikes, they have appropriate clothes. I don't think they have any more fun than they used to.
So where does it end? It starts at the Missouri River and...
Ends at the Mississippi. and people dip their wheels. Sometimes the Missouri, we're not right at the Missouri. Glenwood a few years ago, it was dangerous to go out, so they had a tank of water with a couple of catfish swimming around in it, and you can dip your wheel in that in the morning if you left, when you left if you wanted to. People, there's a wide variety of people who go on RAGBRAI, and there are people who get up early in the morning, race to the town that we're going to be in, and are in by noon. There are people that get up at 9 o'clock and come in slowly. Frank, Iowa, that's not here tonight, and our friend Barry Katz from New York try to be the last ones in. They've had century days where they try to stop 100 times in one day. And, you know, they...
What's a century? How does that figure into
a century is 100 miles.
one each week?
There's one each week. It used to be there was one you had to go on. You had to ride 100 miles to get to the destination town that night. We rode into Pella that day. I had borrowed a tent from my partner, and it was a little Sears pup tent. And I didn't know what a rainfly was, and apparently my partner didn't either, because it rained a couple of inches in Pella that night, and I had half a pad to sleep on that stopped with your hips, let your legs weren't padded. And I had an old sleeping bag that was pretty water absorbent, and no rain fly, so the rain just came in to my tent, and I woke up with a couple of inches of water in the bottom of my tent that morning. Even Beck left town late that day. It was so bad. They didn't leave with the bus with the trucks until about 9 o'clock or 9:30 that morning.
Did you run into Lance Armstrong?
We saw him, and we had a great time. My friend Dave Culver, that I've ridden almost every mile with for the last 15 years, is a really quiet guy, but very funny. And we were standing in this town one time when Lance is coming into town, and the road comes in from the north, makes a left-hand turn, and comes a block, and we were standing in maybe the corner of a cemetery in this town with a couple of women. And we kept saying, "Oh, that's Lance, and it wasn't. We just kept waiting. And I told this woman that Dave's father was famous because he was the newspaper editor of the little town in a little town in northern Iowa, who wrote the headline, "Fertile Woman Marries Manly Man." And I told this girl that, and she said, "Oh, that's not true." Well, it was true. And we said, "Well, get his mom on the phone. She'll tell you that." And we couldn't get her on the phone. So we rode on 20, 30 miles. We came up behind these two women and started talking to them. And one of them looked at us and said, "There are 15,000 people on RAGBRAI. Why did we have to see you two guys twice in the same day?" But yeah, we saw Lance. He'd zip past. And you've got a picture with him.
Yeah, we just happened to be at a stop, and we were there for about 5 minutes, and we saw under this little awning there was some ruckus going on. Mr. Porkchop was there, and Lance Armstrong was sitting there talking to him, so we ran over and threw our arms around him and got our picture.
Who's Mr. Porkchop?
I'm not sure the guy's name. He passed away, I think, about a year ago, but he has that pink bus, and they sell pork chops that are fantastic. And they're usually out about 20 miles or so, and usually for lunch, you can stop and get a pork chop if you start late enough. Sometimes you get there for breakfast, but they're good to eat. No, I'm not sure where.
Bancroft, I think.
Bancroft?
Bancroft, yeah, that's where it's.
You can tell from my slides, I took a lot of pictures of food and pie, so that's my specialty.
There's a lot of good pies. I got to my hometown a few years ago, and my mom used to be a great pie maker, and she'd kind of retired from making pies, so my sister made a gooseberry pie for me. So we pulled into my hometown, and there was one piece of gooseberry pie left that they had been protecting from one of my good friends in grade school days for about the last 4 or 5 hours. So it was for me, and I got the pie, and about 5 or 6 of us ate it, including my good friend from back in high school and 4-H days. But pies, there was one year when there was nothing but bratwurst. All I could find to eat was bratwurst. Thank God they changed the menu around. It's hard to find vegetables. There's plenty of fruit. There's watermelon and apples and bananas running out your ears.
Well, Ann and I did a bike ride last weekend with a couple of longtime Iowa City cyclists, and they stopped twice on the ride, and they stopped at cemeteries both times. Do you remember when people started stopping at cemeteries on RAGBRAI?
People were stopping at cemeteries when I started.
Did you recognize any of them from Iowa City?
No. But then if you stopped at cemeteries, you forgot who you saw. I remember one time there's a little town called Nodaway, just the next town east of the axe murder house town. And that's where I grew up. And I remember years ago, we rode into Muscatine, and I just decided I'd ride back home. It was easier than putting my bike in the box. So I'm riding back home, and I'm seeing, 5 or 6 people every mile, and then I'm seeing 1 person every mile, and then I'm going a couple of miles and not seeing anybody. And finally, way off in the distance, I see a guy approaching me slowly. And we meet, and it's a kid from my hometown. He had spent the day in the bar in West Liberty, and he was just now heading for Muscatine. So there are a lot of people who do things like that.
On the other hand, there are people like me and my family. We always get up early, and try to be on the road before the sun comes up. And that's against the rules, but that's what we like to do because, well, me in particular, really slow, and so it takes me all day if I get up and go really early. It still takes me until late to get in on the other end. I was going to say, my first year, RAGBRAI 20, I was 44 years old. My first year, my boys were finally old enough to go on RAGBRAI. And so I had a brand new Gary Fisher cross bike. I thought it was awesome until I'd ridden it. But it wasn't a good bike. But anyway, it was Southern Iowa, and the guys, my younger son and my husband, would ride on ahead of me up the hill, and I forgot to say, training, in those days they said, you should ride 500 miles. 500. You'd probably have been fine at 500, but it surely wasn't good for me, especially when a lot of my 500 miles was going up and down Sand Road.
Yeah, RAGBRAI 20 went through Corning and down to Bedford, I think. Does it tell where it goes? RAGBRAI 20?
Yeah.
It was Southern Iowa. I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway.
The pork chop guy's name was Paul Bernhardt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think RAGBRAI was in southern Iowa, RAGBRAI 20, right?
Yeah, oh,
So there's-
Oh, yeah.
absolutely. And our younger son, or our older son, was already racing some. And so he whizzed on ahead of us, and when we got to the big campground, he, of course, if he went ahead, was supposed to put up our tent, but he had not done that. He was in the big party tent talking to a girl from State College, Pennsylvania, and they loved each other for all the rest of the years that they both did
Yeah.
RAGBRAI every year. So did you see where we went?
Started in Glenwood, ended in Keokuk. We went from Glenwood to Shenandoah
Yeah.
to Bedford, Osceola, Des Moines, Oskaloosa, and Mount Pleasant.
It was the first year I went,
Was it?
and I just went on one day. I had somebody haul me down to Des Moines downtown.
That isn't called going.
Well, it was
Yeah,
for me.
okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
First time,
It
rode
would
from
be
Des
for me
Moines to
too.
Osceola. And I told my son, I said, this is really a lot of fun. I think
And
I
you're
ought to do it."
hooked. One day can make you hooked.
Yes.
Yeah, my younger son and I had done one day the year before we started. And it was a really easy day from, it was Twimana, from Grinnell to Twimana. It was such an easy day, it was mostly flat. So I thought, gee, we can do this. And of course that got me thinking of it wrong. And after RAGBRAI that first year, I did so poorly that my husband said, the only way we're ever going to do RAGBRAI again is if we get a tandem so we can stay together. And so we bought a used tandem from somebody that had ridden it a little bit one year and didn't like it. And we rode that for a few years and bought a more wonderful tandem the next year, and that was good. And I got to thinking, I can't go on RAGBRAI without the tandem after I'd done that a few years. And then all of a sudden I couldn't find, well, one year it was a girl between her junior and senior year at West High, and she hadn't hardly ever ridden a bike before. And she had to be my captain because she was taller than I was, and she had to be in the front. And we did great. People thought she was my daughter. It'd be awesome to have a daughter like that. Anyway, I eventually went by myself a couple of years. I had wrecks. I wouldn't look up, and I would go over the handlebars, hurt the rest of the week. Yeah, but I kept doing it because I got hooked that very first year, that one day, and I didn't ever want to stop. So I've stopped.
We haven't talked about all the families that go on RAGBRAI and
Oh,
have a
my
great time.
goodness.
And I mean, RAGBRAI gets this bad reputation of it's a big party and there's a lot of drinking going on, but there's also a lot of families, and I think there's wonderful bonding with the families. Last year or the year before, we stopped for breakfast at this place, and right after that, two couples came riding in, and they were like, three little kids with one couple, two in a trailer behind the bike, a third one on the bike and a little seat on the back of it. And the other couple had two kids with them, so there were five little kids. And when I say little kids, these were all in diapers. Now, I have enough trouble getting myself across the state. How they can get all those little kids across the state is beyond me.
It gets so hot for little kids
Yeah.
down low.
Yeah.
It would be really hard.
So Larry, did you actually do a whole RAGBRAI ever?
Yeah, 15 of them.
Oh, 15 of them. So were you all members of an organization that helped? How did you have to register for RAGBRAI? And how does all that work? And
Well, you should.
I always played the lottery when I went.
what's that mean?
Well, you send your name and your information in. I sent it in for my
To
kids.
RAGBRAI.
And to RAGBRAI, and then, so they supposedly pull your name out of a hat, and if you get pulled out, then you get to go. But then eventually, I had like 3 kids going with me, just 1 adult and 3, my own kids, but, well, then some of the neighbors too. But the RAGBRAI thought I had too many kids for me to watch. So he said I had to join a bike club. So I think that year I joined the Atomo Peddlers, and I went with them. And then I ran into somebody from Nevada. At that time I lived in Nevada. They said, "Oh, we have a club here in Nevada. You can just go with us." So after that, we got all the RAGBRAI registration we wanted just through our group. And Bic does the same thing. They have 140 passes they get every year. So you're
Or we
sure
get however many we want.
Exactly.
Actually, we used to, it was restricted to a certain smaller number, and then they just let us have as many as we wanted.
And
But,
so you would,
like, excuse me, like when Frank Iowa, when he started going, it was like if you hauled your own stuff, you didn't have to pay any registration. And so there's a lot of people from Iowa City, they would just ride their bikes out to the beginning of RAGBRAI and then ride back, and they didn't pay any registration at all.
There's still people that do that.
And still do that.
and I went on a couple just one-day rides, and I didn't, there are a lot of people who just joined for a day, and
Well, you're
I know.
supposed to still get a one day wristband.
but nobody's policing it, so.
Right.
No.
That's right. And everybody can be on the highway. It's legal. So what you can't have is the RAGBRAI services, which are
Segway.
Segwagon. Yeah, I guess maybe that's the biggest, because an ambulance is surely going to pick you up even if you don't have a wristband.
You get a little discount on food, like you might spend $1 less for a hamburger if you've got the RAGBRAI wristband.
Or shower is a little cheaper.
Yeah, shower might be $1 cheaper.
With Vic, we take sun showers as well, so you can have a sun shower and not even pay extra. Well, it does cost to do that too.
Was there more homemade stuff when you started going, first started going, Gordon?
Homemade stuff, what do you mean?
Like cookies and,
Well, there still is.
Well, I think most of the pies are still homemade. Yeah, that.
or was it a lot cheaper?
Oh yeah, it was a lot
yes.
cheaper.
It was
You know,
for you
people
too.
people suffered more. I can remember the first year I went coming to a railroad crossing where you had a rise of 1 foot, and hearing people in absolute agony having to go over that 1 foot rise for the railroad track. They were hurting so much.
But even the highways had a lot of bumps, a lot more. What the cross pieces?
Cracks,
Well,
rumble strips.
no, not that, but just going down any road, there'd be a lot of sort of
Benders?
cracks
Yeah.
in it, and you'd have to ride over all that, and without bike shorts and without good seats or.
Well, even if you get the most expensive seat and the best bike shorts,
Yeah.
your back end
It's-
still hurts. after a
Until
while,
you
know.
get a comfortable recumbent seat like I've been riding the last 2 years. Maybe that's why I'm slow.
Ann, do you have anything to say?
I'd like to hear more about families and kids, so if you could talk about those adventures.
What about, like,
Larry's the expert on
Karen's-
that.
well, yeah, I guess.
Well, when I started taking my kids, very first year I went, I think we met Gordon that year. It was like, we just rode together. My son was like 11, and we just rode. We were like inseparable. And then his younger brother went, and there was like 3 of us. And he said, well, it's going to be hard for us to stay together, so I just give the kids like $20 every morning and said, I'll see you in the campground. So that worked real good. They liked to see different things. And but the big limit for them was there's only a handful of kids that actually in their teens go on RAGBRAI. I mean, it was really surprising. They met some kids but they met kids from all over. You know, there'd be kids from Chicago there. There'd be kids from New York City, New Jersey that would show up, but there really wouldn't be that many Iowa kids until they told their friends, you know, and they said, oh yeah, it sounds like fun, you know, can we go with you too? So there's, you know, more kids from their neighborhood than went too after a while.
I think Karen Parrott and her sister
Mm-hmm.
went when they were in high school, didn't they?
I know
When
a
they
woman
were-
that has gone on one more RAGBRAI than she is years old.
Yeah.
Well, that's right, Carolyn.
Is her name Carolyn? It's Terry and
Oh, that's her mother's name's Carolyn. It's Terry and Carolyn, and then I can't remember the daughter's name. She runs the bar down in Imogene.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think her child is like the same way,
Yeah.
conceived on RAGBRAI.
Yeah. So Karen was pregnant with the one daughter,
I gotta think.
And-
They're probably in the book.
and Terry is the guy with only one arm. And they're from the Shenandoah area, and so that daughter, then the next year was along in a bugger, and has been there every year. I think that one's named Tina,
That doesn't sound right.
but I don't
Could
know
be,
for
though.
sure. I remember I was
They
in
have
a,
it. They have their grandson or granddaughter.
yeah,
Can't
I was in a
remember which.
yard somewhere,
Same thing.
and a guy from Iowa City came rolling in with his 2 twin sons who were about 12. And this guy said, I've just had to whip them to get them to this town. They are just exhausted. Well, the kids got into town, got off the bikes, and they said, we want something to eat, we want a Coke. You know, they ran off and got that stuff. And Larry laid down under a tree, and he was tired. And pretty soon the kids came back and said, let's go. And Larry's going, oh no, I gotta do this again, because the kids recover so fast, and the grown-ups don't recover very fast.
Speaking of people that you know and, well, or not so well even, one year on RAGBRAI, I stopped for breakfast and started talking to a couple guys from California. And I'd see them periodically the rest of the week. And they always recognized me when I didn't recognize them, but I don't know, 3 or 4 years later, I was on RAGBRAI with a couple of my siblings and niece, and I don't know, there were 5 or 6 of us, family group, and we went quite a ways from the campground to a Chinese restaurant for lunch. And this guy comes up to me, and it's the guy that I'd been talking to years before from California, and he remembered me, and we talked a few times as we went up to the buffet line to get more food, and he left before we did. And when we left, he had paid for all of our meals.
Wow.
Who would have thought? I mean, what a surprise. Never know what you find on RAGBRAI.
Did you ever encounter bad weather?
Oh,
Oh, my. What about the year, I came home for a day when you were going into Marshalltown, was it Marshalltown? Where everything blew away? Everybody I knew talked about, you were too drunk to know?
I was?
No, I don't know.
No, the only time I ever came in really drunk was in Cedar Rapids.
Oh, I didn't, I wasn't serious.
We a friend of mine and I stopped in Palo, another urologist, and we are riding out of Palo as the sun is setting, heading into Cedar Rapids. And a guy riding with us must have been worse than us because he said, "Wow, look at the sunrise."
Oh,
we got in and we came in the street and Benny and I thought it was a pretty smooth street coming in. First we got lost and followed some people that were going to a house, and then we realized we were off route, went back, got on the route, came into where Bick was, over this nice smooth street, set up our tents by the street lights. The next morning we got on our bikes to ride out of town, and it was the roughest street I have ever seen in my life. We didn't have any idea that it was a rough street when we came in that night. But that's the worst I've behaved on RAGBRAI, I think.
I think the year Barb's talking about, I was on it because there was 3 80-mile days in a row, which was pretty long. And one of them was, I don't know if it was Ames to Marshalltown, whatever it was, going to Marshalltown. It was an 80-plus mile day, and it was hot, and there was headwinds. And I don't know how many people dropped out. And then that night, it stormed, and one of our members, or a couple members, were in the emergency shelter, and it was horrible weather. But my relatives, in-laws, live in Marshalltown, so me and 5 or 6 BIC members went to my in-laws' house. We had made rights, peach pie. We were watching the Olympic trials and slept in a bed and air conditioning. And the next morning, we went back to the camp and found out that they'd had an awful night. And I said, "Oh, did it storm? I couldn't hear. The air conditioner was running." So.
a lot of the people got into the trucks,
Yeah.
that night.
We were riding, Kat and I were riding north one day somewhere in kind of north central Iowa, maybe northeast Iowa, and you could see this storm coming up, and riding with us, or about at the same time as us, was Chris Vilsack and a friend of hers. And the storm clouds get more and more threatening. It's just really getting ugly out there. And this highway patrol van pulls up from the opposite direction. Chris Vilsack throws her bike in, rides away in the van, and the rain hits, and it rains so hard that we could hardly see the road. And I think it may have been, that must have been Esterville we were going into. So it'd get a little farther west in Iowa, but it just absolutely poured rain.
There was a late 80s first night where the storm came in and blew tents into the lake, or
It blew tents into the lake in Storm Lake one night, back maybe RAGBRAI 18 or so.
my sister was on that one, and the first night was so bad.
Said people had to dive for tents the next morning.
Yeah, but you can walk across Storm Lake. Apparently, it's really shallow, so they didn't get very far blown into it. But.
Well, there was another stormy night when it had been really hot that day, as that one was that you were just talking about. And we were on the tandem. And we were early because on the tandem we could go pretty fast. And so we got the spot under the big shade tree. It was a huge tree in this park. And there came up a big storm in the night. And that night, I think Todd was saying how she was holding her tent up that night. Our tent stayed up pretty well. And we stayed in the tent where most people, we just don't like to leave the tent. It might blow away after all. So anyway, we usually stay in the tent. And
But it's not good to be under a tree either. Somebody
Well,
died on
that
RAGBRAI
is
when
the
a
night
branch collapsed on the tent one time.
somebody was killed that night under a tree.
Sheldon?
The worst storm I was ever in was on RAGBRAI 25. We were camped out in Sheridan, Iowa, and it started raining. It rained so hard that my sons and I were in a dome tent, an old Coleman dome tent that it wasn't anywhere near waterproof anyway, and it blew down flat on my chest and held the tent on my chest. Somebody said it rained 10 inches. I don't know whether it rained that much or not, but it was so muddy in the campground they had to use four-wheel drive tractors to pull the RVs out of the campground. And the campground was actually just a hayfield that one of my cousins owned, and it was just cut to pieces when it was in with. But I just remember laying there. I couldn't even get up because the tent was like blown down on my chest, and it was just pouring down rain. And my daughter and my oldest son's girlfriend were sleeping in a little backpacker tent. It was like across from where we were, and it was so hot. Earlier in the evening, they had us roll up the rain flies so they could get air flowing through it, and like you could see where the water just run through their tent. And, all their stuff was wet. It was horrible. But everything dried out eventually.
I remember camping in Washington one night. It was the year that it rained like 6 out of the 8 days that RAGBRAI was going on. We were in a rain. We'd come from Cedar Rapids down through Iowa City and ended up in Washington. And we were camped by the high school there, and there were these two guys camping together in a big tent. And they're talking about how important it is to get your ground cover spread out beyond the tent so that it keeps the water from coming into your tent. Well, it works just the opposite of that. If you have your ground cover spread out wide, then it can come on the ground cover and it runs in underneath the floor of your tent. So the next morning they got up and were soaked inside their tent. And then we rode to wherever we were going through a rain that just had your teeth shattering. We came out of a town a few years ago and it was so cold that my buddies, it was so cold that his arms were shaking and he couldn't keep the handlebars straight, so he was weaving on the road. So we stopped at a farmhouse. There was an FFA tent there and they were selling watermelon, which wasn't very popular with us at the time. And we all stood, they happened to have a front porch on the north side of the house and the window was out of the south. So a bunch of people were standing on the front porch, and literally there must have been 20 or 30 people there, and we all just got into this big circle and everybody was hugging each other. So there's just this mass of humanity stuck together trying to stay warm.
There's a reason why you need to take your rain jacket.
Yeah.
You probably don't, though.
Oh, I
'cause
had
you
my,
don't
no.
carry-
Yeah, I had my rain jacket with me. It was still cold.
Do you have anything to add, Gladys?
It's been so long since I've been on. It's been so long since I've been on it, I've forgotten everything. I just enjoyed the 2 years I wrote it.
You may as well go this year.
One year, it was, I think it might have been one year we came into Coralville, that like 3 days in a row, it was over 100 miles. You just had to do it.
Wow.
And there were, and a lot of people sagged part of that time because of the headwind. I think it was going south to Sigourney or something.
Saggy Thursday. It was only about
That was
65.
1995.
That was only about
That was my
65
death
miles,
march.
but we went from Tama to Sigourney.
Yeah.
Ann and I were there for
Straight
that.
south.
And what made me, I got about a mile out of town and I saw the first person sag that day. And then you'd be riding along with your head down between your knees, fighting the wind, and people would get a ride in a pickup, and you'd see them riding the pickup until they got about half a mile to a mile outside of the next town, and they'd unload from the pickup, and they'd ride in like they had ridden all that way, and they just kept doing that all day long.
I proudly rode all the way into Sigourney on a pickup that I'd hired. I wasn't gonna do
good
that.
for you.
I rode
Fake
all
my
the way
friends
into
out.
Sigourney on a bicycle. I have a T-shirt that says I did it.
I remember waiting until after dark and then riding in with Iowa City people.
Yeah, because the wind went down.
Because the wind
we were
died.
so,
So I've been told we have time for one more question, and I was wondering if we could do a quick best and least best memory that you have of RAGBRAI.
it's the people, for me. I mean, I wouldn't go for the ride, because I'm not an athlete that way, but I just love talking to the people. I love meeting that family from State College that we saw every year for, I don't know, 6 years maybe. And they always traveled with Ben. So,
Gordon's still thinking.
I'm thinking, best memories are always going through my hometown, which is the worst memory for a lot of people because it's southwest Iowa. But, you know, when I think about friends that I've made on RAGBRAI, I was taking a nap on about my third or fourth RAGBRAI under a tree. And I woke up and here is this somewhat scruffy guy laying there next to me taking a nap too. And he woke up at about the same time. And we introduced ourselves to each other, and his name was Barry Katz from
Same
Hell's
guy.
Kitchen, New York. And Barry remains a friend, and you know,
that's why I always
that might
thought he
one
must
of-
be from Iowa City, because you were always with him.
Well, I never ride with him. Barry's way,
Well,
way behind
I know,
us,
but at the end,
he always goes
at the
home
end-
with me. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a great memory, just getting to meet Barry. But there are so many nice people that I've met on RAGBRAI. That's how I met Larry. You know.
I met Larry on a Thursday night leisure ride, I guess.
Larry, do you have a favorite memory?
Maybe the last day I went. I don't know, it just, you know, I met a lot of really nice people, you know, on RAGBRAI, and that's probably the best part of it. And the worst part, you know, it's just like, when the best part about bicycle touring is like you're independent. You know, you got all this independence and freedom. You can ride anywhere you want, as fast or as slow as you want. And with RAGBRAI, you give part of that away because you got to go along with all the rest of these people and go to the same place. And that's probably the worst part of it for me.
But the good part of that is that I can go really slow and still do a long ride all by myself in the midst of the crowd. And I mean, just regular rides, I can't keep up. So that made me be with riding people all day.
Does anybody else have anything else to add?
Well, thanks for the memories, and
Yeah.
it'll be fun this year when it comes to Iowa City. So, and I think there's food back here if anybody wants to continue
Plenty of
talking.
refreshments.
Thank you all.